Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. You can hear me, and can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Amazing. Okay. I'm going to go into presenter mode. So I want people to see if you chat or anything, but if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to interrupt me and let me know. Okay. So hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this policy paper workshop. Today, we're going to be talking about the final paper you have assigned for Professor Durakan's Poli-Sci 1 class. I have been a tutor with Professor Durakan for about 2 years, so I'm very familiar with this assignment, and I've been helping students for about that same amount of time. So I'm also familiar with a lot of the mistakes or challenges that students run into writing this paper. So hopefully this workshop will clarify some of that, explain the prompt, and hopefully address some things you might be having trouble with as you're writing. So here's our agenda. I sent out the attendance form already to those in attendance today. So today, we're going to first discuss the prompt. I'm going to break down the different aspects of the prompt, answer any questions you may have about the prompt. For those of you who are watching the recording, feel free to email me. My email will be at the end of this presentation if you have any questions about the prompt. We're going to go over an example, so that will hopefully help you visualize a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about. Sort of, you're presented with like a concept, something you have to include in your paper, but you may not necessarily know what that looks like in a real world application. So there's going to be an opportunity for you to see that in an example. We're going to talk about finding sources. You may have seen in the prompt that you have to have 4 different sources. So I'm going to give you some tips on how to find those sources. We're going to have a brief MLA formatting review, and I'm going to give you some resources to do a little more research into MLA formatting in case you are struggling with it. We're going to have one slide talking about writing tips, and then at the end, I'll answer any questions. But again, feel free to ask questions as we go along for those in attendance. Let me make sure no one's in the waiting room real quick. Cool, we are good to go. Okay, let's get started. So first of all, what is a policy paper? A policy paper describes an existing problem, proposes a policy solution to that problem, and then breaks down the details of the solution. So I've highlighted in bold a couple important things to note about this description. So first of all, your policy paper describes an existing problem, and by that we mean an ongoing problem. So we're really interested in you writing a paper about a problem that's either addressing your community, right, your neighborhood, your city, your state, or your country, but it has to be something that's ongoing, you know. Maybe don't talk about Hurricane Katrina cleanup or something like that, something that's happened in the history. This is not a historical paper. Don't talk about like the policy problem of women not having the right to vote and how we overcame that problem. This is really something that's ongoing right now. And secondly, you're going to propose a policy solution to the problem. And when we say policy solution, that means that it's going through some kind of policy making body. So it's a political solution. So say you've identified your problem is there's a lot of trash at your local or your nearest beach. And your solution to that could be that we need to, nonprofits and churches maybe need to do more beach cleanups. That's a great solution, but it's not a policy solution. A policy solution might be something more like invest more money into these nonprofit organizations that are doing these beach cleanups, provide more government funding for them. That's going to be a policy solution. So it needs to be somehow make its way through a policy making body. And that doesn't have to be, you know, the US Congress. It can be the California State Legislature. It could be the LA City Council. It could be your neighborhood council. It could be your school board. It just needs to make its way through some kind of decision maker. And then breaks down the details of the solution. So you're going to see on the next slide exactly what this paper needs to include. And this section of the paper is going to be the opportunity for you to really put into practice a lot of the things that you've learned so far in this class. Okay, moving on. This next section is directly from the assignment in Canvas. So these are Professor Durakan's words. So I'm going to break down point out a couple important things in this section. So it says, in this 3-page paper, you will propose a policy, which means a political solution, which we just discussed, to a given problem. The objective of this assignment is to convince readers that this prescribed policy provides the best political ideas and tools to tackle and solve the problem. So the first thing I want to point out is that this is a 3-page paper, and I'm going to keep talking about this throughout this presentation. You do not have a lot of space in this paper. You have 3 pages. So I really just from the get-go want to remind you to not spend too much time defining the problem, because you do have a lot of different aspects in this paper that you're going to have to cover, and you don't want to spend, a really long time doing a lot of research into defining the problem. Then you write 2 pages defining it, and then at the end you realize that you don't have enough space to add everything else you have to add, and then you have to go back and delete all this amazing research you've done. So definitely do research, but keep in mind that this is 3 pages long. And we'll talk more about what that's going to look like later. And then secondly, the objective is to convince readers that your policy is the best political idea. So in any given problem in society, there are going to be multiple, sometimes even hundreds of different solutions to a problem. And a lot of issues are very layered and complex and nuanced, and they hit all sorts of different aspects of society. So as a result, there's going to be lots of different ways you can address that problem. So your goal is not to describe every single possible solution. You're going to pick one, and then you're going to basically explain why should we prioritize this solution above other solutions. Hopefully that helps sort of clarify what the objective of this paper is. Then the prompt says the best way to find a topic is to identify a problem in your job, your home, your community, city, school, or any other localized area. And I've bolded that as well, because it's something that is super important to this paper. The more specific you can get with your topic, the better your paper will be. And specific can be like, maybe you're limiting the geographic area that you're talking about the problem in. So for example, we see homelessness as one of the sample topics on the screen. And homelessness is a huge issue, and it affects every state in this country, right? It affects all of our communities. It affects so many different aspects of society, from mental health to all sorts of things. So we really, really want you to get specific if you choose homelessness. And so that can be like, yeah, you're limiting the geographic area to homelessness in your community. So for example, I grew up in Sylmar in the San Fernando Valley. Maybe I'll talk about homelessness in Sylmar, right? You may talk about homelessness in your neighborhood, or you may talk about a specific population affected by homelessness. So maybe you'll talk about the high rates at which LGBTQ youth experience homelessness in California. And so but in both cases, you're sort of limiting your scope, because like we said, it's a 3-page paper. You cannot describe homelessness and what solution for homelessness in 3 pages. So the more you limit it, the better your work is going to be. Okay. That being said, as I wrote a note down here, we have some great examples of topics here. They are all too broad. The goal of these sample topics is to get you thinking about potential topics you might want to pick, and just to start sort of triggering your brainstorming, but all of them are too broad. Like I said, homelessness is too broad of a topic. You're going to have to narrow it down if you pick it. The opioid crisis is also too broad to pick for this paper. You're going to need to narrow it down if you want to talk about opioid addiction. Same thing with prison overcrowding. You could talk about prison overcrowding in California, for example, or at a particular prison, or prison overcrowding in COVID, things like that, but just narrow down your scope. Okay, any questions about that so far? Feeling good? Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
we're good.
Awesome. Okay. Next, this is also directly from the Canvas assignment description. So your paper will include a presentation of the problem, its existence, seriousness, and causes. So that's really important. Every single one of those is important to describe in your paper. Its existence is basically you're proving that this is a problem. You're not just sort of making up something. You're proving that it's a serious problem and that it's an ongoing issue. And you can easily cover that section with some statistics, some facts, some data that you're obviously going to cite. Seriousness is basically establishing a sense of urgency. So why do we need to solve this problem right now? Why, out of all the issues we need to solve, should we focus on this one? So you're really saying this isn't just a problem that our society faces, but it's really it's really an important problem that we should address. Sorry, give me 1 second. And then the last thing is causes. When you're doing problem definition, you really want to address what some of the causes of the problem are. And then moving to the next section, we're talking about consequences of failing to solve the problem. And this really ties into seriousness, but you're basically going to describe why we need to address this problem right now, and at what cost we will face as society if we don't. The next section is title of the policy. And so this is a fun section where you get to be creative. As you've probably seen in this class, or if you've looked at legislation before, policies are titled with sort of the name of the legislation. So for example, you might have this summer, we had the Justice and Policing Act, and that was the name of one of the policies that was presented in the US Congress in response to George Floyd's murder. So that's sort of the name of the policy. And then attached to that name in the House of Representatives was HR and then a number. And so I'll show an example on the next slide of what that kind of looks like. But you might want to come up with or do some research into how, if you're going through a legislative body, especially a big one like Congress or the state legislature, how they name their legislation, how they sort of number it and itemize it. And then you can include that title, and then as well as coming up with your own creative title that sort of describes the policy that you're suggesting. Moving on, we have stakeholders. And this is a section that can often confuse students, but a stakeholder is essentially anybody who stands to be affected by this policy. So it can be, like she says here, individuals, groups, institutions, or governments. And I just recommend, again, there's going to be so many stakeholders in any given issue. There's a lot of these issues affect so many different aspects of society. So I would recommend maybe focusing on picking 2 examples from each of those sections that she identified. So maybe 2 individuals that might stand to benefit or not benefit. These can be people who would support the policy for various reasons and people who might oppose the policy for various reasons. Groups that might be involved, that might have some kind of stake in the policy, institutions, and governments. So as long as you're hitting on at least an example of one of those, you're going to be good in this area. Description of the proposed policy in detail. So this is sort of your opportunity to describe what is your policy, how does it work, how are you going to staff it? Say you're opening a facility to address mental health concerns in your community. Who's going to staff it? Are you going to hire social workers? Are you going to hire therapists? Who's going to be working in that facility? Who's the facility going to be serving? How is the facility going to get money? Who's going to fund it, right? So this is your opportunity to really break down what your policy is all about and how it's going to work. And then we have this next section, which I call the methods, your methods for getting your policy through some kind of decision-making body. And that's going to be your list of steps for raising awareness by your group and mobilizing public support to help you solve the problem. So you may have some personal experience with this, right? Where maybe you've, for example, in the past couple of weeks, been receiving texts and seeing ads about the different propositions. And that's an example of mobilizing public support, right? Some people in favor and against propositions are trying to mobilize people to get out and vote in favor or against a particular prop. And so that's one example of what this awareness raising section might look like. It could also look like social media campaigns. It could look like community organizing. It could look like big lobbying efforts that have a lot of money behind them. It really depends on what your issue is and what the best strategy you think might be to get your policy passed. And then finally, discussions of reasons to support the policy. So again, why is your policy the best solution to this problem? And this could be an opportunity where you address people who might oppose it and say, look, I hear you, like this might cost a lot of money, for example, but it's actually going to help boost our economy. And so that's why we should pass it. So there's going to be different reasons to support different policies. But these are the essential elements of what you're going to include in your paper. And we're going to do an example on the next slide to hopefully help you visualize that a little bit more. Okay, so let's do an example. And before I dig into this example, I just want to offer a disclaimer. if you're watching this as a recording and you're going to keep watching, do not use this example as the topic for your paper. I did do some research into it, and I'm kind of breaking down every aspect of this assignment under the umbrella of this topic. And so it would just be doing you a disservice if you take this topic as your own, because then you're not going to be doing your own research and you're not going to be applying these concepts yourself. So it's a very specific topic. I've never seen a student do this topic before, so hopefully I'm not taking anybody's idea. But if you were thinking about doing this topic, come talk to me and we can find maybe another issue related to this that you could potentially do. So the problem I've identified is plastic pollution, okay? So again, if you're super passionate about environmental issues, come talk to me and we can find another environmental issue for you to write about. Okay, so the problem is plastic pollution. I've told you what the problem is. Now I have to prove to you that it's actually a problem. So I'm going to do that with some stats. I have not done super in-depth research into this because I'm not writing a paper about it, but I hope you will do more in-depth research than I did. But I just found one statistic to prove the existence of my problem. So my stat is that since the 1950s, around 8.3 billion tons of plastic have been produced worldwide. So we have a problem of plastic pollution. It exists, it's out there, but is it a big deal? Is it a big problem? And that's where this next stat comes in. Yes, this plastic pollution is a serious problem. Plastic pollution is killing more than 1.1 million seabirds and animals every year, destroying ecosystems, threatening people's livelihoods, and damaging the oceans we all depend upon. Now, again, I'm making some claims here. I'm making a claim that it's destroying ecosystems, but I have not included any evidence because, again, I'm not writing this paper. But if you're going to make a claim that plastic pollution is destroying ecosystems, you're going to have some supporting evidence for that, and you're going to have to cite it, of course. So, but overall, this is just to show you what it might look like for you to prove that your issue is serious and that it should be addressed immediately. Okay. And then secondly, it's causes. And there are a lot of causes for plastic pollution. So the cause that I've identified is going to connect to what my solution is. So you may want to think about that as you're thinking about causes for your issue that you're going to talk about. So it's causes. There are lots of causes of plastic pollution. For example, worldwide, about 2 million plastic bags are used every minute. So plastic bags are one of the causes of plastic pollution that I've identified. And then if you remember from the last slide, the next section we have to talk about is the consequences. So how will society be affected if we do not solve this problem immediately? And I wrote, the consequences of failing to solve the problem could be that the entire human food supply chain is affected. People around the world lose their livelihoods, the fishing industry and its employees are affected, etc. So you would want to get very specific about what the consequences of your specific issue are. And you can use this language that I used here. You can be very on the nose about it here. So yeah, definitely feel free to use this language that the consequences of failing to solve the problem are blank. But that's an example of what that would look like. And okay, so here we go to my solution. So again, remember, there's two big sections, I guess 3 technically, sections of this paper. You have your problem definition, where you're really defining what the problem is. And again, hopefully you'll do it in more detail than I've done here. Then you're moving into your solution. So you're describing a problem, and then you're describing your solution, and then you're breaking down the details of your solution. So my solution to this particular problem is that the United States Congress needs to immediately pass legislation banning plastic bags nationwide. I've decided to take a federal approach, and in my paper, I don't think I put this on the slide, but something I might talk about is why is this the best way to approach this problem? You know, like why shouldn't it be state by state? Or why shouldn't it be like treaties with other countries where we sanction countries that aren't banning plastic bags? There's a lot of different ways to approach this from a political angle, but my argument might be, well, it can't be state by state because then it's never going to get done, you know? So California already did something like this. Hawaii's doing something like this. There's maybe 8 or 10 states in the US that have passed legislation banning plastic bags, but that's not enough. You know, it's not solving the problem on a big enough scale. And so we have to go to the United States Congress to ban plastic bags across the entire country. So that might be an argument I might make about why I've chosen this route in particular. And here's my title of my policy. Now, here's where I'm putting an example of how Congress, in particular, in this case, the US House of Representatives, itemizes their legislation. So they start with H.R. For House of Representatives, and then they have a number associated with it. So every legislation has a number. In fact, I can show you. If we go to congress.gov, which is public, you should have access to this. Here's an example. Here's an actual bill that's currently being discussed in the 116th Congress, and it's called HR 8337. So there's an example. If we go back, we can see how the Senate numbers their bills, and it's S dot and then a number. Okay. Again, I would do some research into this because there's going to be, each legislative body is going to number it differently. So if you choose the California State Legislature, it might look a little different. It will look a little different. And then after I've itemized my legislation, and again, this is not mandatory. This is something you can add if you'd like to do that. If you're passing this maybe through a city council or school board, you may not necessarily title it like this, but it might be a nice touch. And then I've come up with a name for my policy. And this is a chance for you to get very creative and very persuasive. So I could have called this the Banning Plastic Bags Act, right? But that doesn't have a very good connotation, and it's less likely to get public support, in my opinion. I don't think I could go around doing rallies and sort of a public, like a campaign in support of the Banning Plastic Bags Act. But the Save Our Oceans Act connects to the seriousness of the problem that I've identified, and it draws on your emotions. We all love the ocean. We all want to protect the ocean. So hopefully this, naming it like this, will help it be more likely to get passed. So that's kind of how you can think about it. Also, the more like catchy or pithy the names of the legislation are, I think the more likely they are to be remembered. Okay. Next, I would talk about stakeholders. So who has a stake in this issue and who might have a stake in my policy solution? So that's who's going to be affected by it. And it doesn't just have to be like they're personally affected by it. It could be that their business is affected by it, right? Or their income is affected by it. Or the money that funds their re-election campaigns is affected by it. So it doesn't have to be like directly personally affecting someone, but it does have to affect them in some way. So stakeholders I've identified for my issue and for the Save Our Oceans Act are plastic bag manufacturers, environmental organizations, the fossil fuel industry, and legislators who receive funding from either of these industries, etc. So plastic bag manufacturers is obvious. Their entire business would probably be affected by this ban. Environmental organizations would probably be in support of this ban. And so they might be helpful in my methods that I'm going to talk about later in helping me galvanize public support for my legislation. The fossil fuel industry, plastic bags are produced by natural gas and petroleum, so they would definitely be affected by this ban. And then legislators who receive funding from either of these industries, whether that's the environmental lobby or the fossil fuel industries, you know, these policymakers get a lot of money from these two different groups. And so they might definitely, that might sort of impact their opinion on the legislation. So again, there are definitely more stakeholders here. And if I had more time, I would have definitely included more. But maybe do a sentence for each one, each stakeholder that you identified, explaining why it's a stakeholder. So I'm not just going to say the fossil fuel industry is a stakeholder in my bill. I'm going to explain why. And it's going to be because the fossil fuels produce plastic. And so the ban indirectly, therefore, affects the fossil fuel industry. So just give like one sentence explaining why these different groups and people are stakeholders. And then finally, we're going to talk about your methods. This is the details of the policy. This is where you're going to really talk about how the policy works and also how you're going to get your bill passed. So some questions you can think about are, what methods are you going to use to make your bill become a law? How are you going to mobilize the public? How are you going to raise awareness? How are you going to get legislators to vote yes? And then also I could think about for banning plastic bags, who's going to enforce that, like state by state, how are we going to get this bill enforced? So, okay, it's enough to say we ban plastic bags, but how do we actually put that into effect? And that's something I could think about in this section when I'm talking about my solution. But yeah, so what methods might I use to make my bill become a law? How are you going to mobilize the public? Okay, so maybe I get a couple of co-sponsors for my legislation in Congress. Since I'm proposing it through the House of Representatives, maybe I go to a legislator like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and I say, I know you support the Green New Deal, you proposed it in the House. Would you be willing to co-sponsor my bill? And then because she is such a public face, maybe she could definitely help with the awareness raising and with mobilizing people to support it. So that's one example of how I might mobilize the public on my particular bill. Again, I might do a social media campaign. I might hire some graphic designers and some videographers to make a video, make a commercial. I might host fundraisers to raise money for all of that. So there's a lot of different things that we could do. And then also do some kind of like advocacy campaign telling people, hey, call your Congress members and tell them to support this bill. And if enough people call them, maybe they'll pay attention to it and sign on as a co-sponsor. And that's kind of how we're going to move this through the House and then eventually through the Senate. So those are some examples of methods I might use for my bill. Do you have any questions about this slide before we move on?
No, I'm good.
Okay, cool. Let's keep going then. Moving away from the content of the prompt, but if you have questions or if anybody watching the recording has questions about anything we just talked about, feel free to email me or schedule a one-on-one tutoring appointment with me. Okay, so now I'm going to direct you to these two sources. These resources are super helpful to learn more about MLA formatting. So if you have struggled with it in the past, either in English classes or in this class, I'm pretty sure you had to do a paper at the beginning with MLA formatting. If you've ever struggled with it, I would highly recommend that you come here. And I'm going to share all of these slides with you so you can access these hyperlinks. But this one here takes you to LA Mission College's library, where they have created so many resources for you to learn and apply MLA style guide. So here we have, on this tab, why we cite. We have a video talking about why it's important to cite your sources. So if you're a little confused, like, why do I have to do this? This is a great video to start with. You come to MLA style guide. So we have MLA and APA and ASA. We're going to focus on MLA. We have a librarian here who breaks down how to format your paper in MLA format. So we're not going to watch the whole thing, but it's a good example. So at the end of it, you're going to see we have a paper formatted in MLA format. So definitely watch this video. I also recommend just watching it, even if you feel super comfortable with it, watch it just to get a refresher or just to double check that you've done everything right, because it's super easy to forget one small little thing and you want to make sure that you're doing it all correctly. And then here, this is a video of how to create a works cited page. So again, the works cited page is going to look very different from this first page of your paper. So I would highly recommend watching this as well if you have struggled in the past with creating a proper works cited page. And then here on the side, if you're not really into watching videos so much, we have physical examples of all of the things they talk about in these videos. So this source, for example, or this resource, breaks down in detail how to cite the first and last page of your MLA cited paper. So this is super helpful. And then we have when we're getting more into citations, these resources are really helpful because they break down exactly how you're going to cite your sources in MLA. So this is how it explains it in really helpful detail. I found that these resources were so helpful in teaching me about MLA to the point that I now can remember it for myself and I don't always have to check back. So definitely explore these resources. And they also break down how to cite a book or an article if you have one author, more than one author, no author, things like that. So highly recommend you take advantage of these resources that the library has created. And then the other thing is Purdue OWL, the holy grail of MLA citing. I would highly recommend you check out this resource as well if you have any further questions. So that's how I recommend doing MLA formatting. If you want me to double check your paper for MLA formatting after you've written it, I'm happy to do that as well. And then next, we're going to talk about finding sources for your paper. So you hopefully saw from the prompt, you have to find 4 sources for your paper. One has to be a book, one has to be an academic journal, one has to be a newspaper, and one has to be a website. So I'm going to talk really briefly about how to find the best sources for each of those different sections. So for a book, obviously life is very different right now, and you can't go to the library at Mission and check out a book about your topic. So here are some just ways to access some online books. If you're having trouble getting your hands on a physical book, you can come to LA Mission College, go down to library, click on our library databases, and then come down here to the 3rd section titled eBooks and Reference. And we have 2 databases full of eBooks. So you'll log in with your student ID. I'll open this one too. And okay, so maybe I'm going to look up an ebook about plastic pollution because that's what my topic is. We have some ebooks here. And again, the ebook may not be like directly related to your topic, but you're going to find some background information, some context. You're going to maybe get an idea of how maybe other countries have addressed their plastic pollution issues. And that might give you ideas for how I might implement my own legislation here in the States. Again, we could do the same. Actually, here they've broken it down into sections, these ebooks. So maybe I'll come down to environmental studies so I can learn more about plastic pollution before I even start writing, but just in the process of doing my research. Here we go, plastic pollution. And we have a bunch of ebooks about it. So this is a great way to fulfill that book requirement without having to get your hands on a physical copy. Then I would also recommend a lot of our, where's my PowerPoint? A lot of libraries, public libraries have like apps. Like there's an app called Libby, Libby, where you can rent audiobooks from your library. And then those are free. And they'll be on your phone or on your Kindle or whatever. And so that's a helpful way to get your hands on a book too, without actually having to go to the library or having to buy something off of online. Next is academic journals. So again, for academic journals, I'm going to direct you to the library databases. So you're going to come onto LA Mission College, go to students, click on library, and then click on databases. And these are super helpful databases right here. I'm fairly certain there's also a political science. No, there's not. We do have, though, current issues, which could be relevant to your topic. So here's opposing viewpoints. If you wanted to find some articles about people who may disagree with your position. Global issues is going to update you about various global issues. And then here we have environment. So I might click on environment to find some academic journal articles about plastic pollution, So highly recommend that you use the library databases. It is absolutely the easiest way to find academic journal articles. So I'll do an example. We're going to look up plastic pollution. So consumer-based actions to reduce plastic pollution in rivers. That's perfect for my topic, just right off the bat, because I'm talking about consumer-created plastic pollution, right? We're talking about plastic bags that people use when they go into grocery stores, and just the high quantity of plastic bags that we produce here in the United States. So I might click on this one, read it, get a bunch of super helpful information and context, and literature reviews are really helpful to sort of understand the current state of academic research on the topic, and also to get some background in history. And then I'm just going to read this, and always at the end, you have the references section where you might find some other really great articles. So for example, let's try to find this one. I'm going to copy that and I'm going to Google it. And believe it or not, here it is. So there's definitely follow the rabbit trail of research, and you're definitely going to find some stuff. And here we go. Plastic pollution on our beaches. And there may be something about plastic bags and how consumer habits are driving plastic bag pollution. So there's a great example. Okay. So yes, use the LA&C library databases. They are free to use. That's one of the benefits of being an LA Mission student, is that you have access to these library databases. So please take advantage of it. Newspapers, this is / magazines. This is fairly straightforward. You're going to use high quality, reliable news sources. If you have questions about a particular news outlet and whether it meets the standard of high quality and reliable, I'm more than happy to talk about that with you, either in an email or in a one-on-one Zoom session. And then for your websites, it's the last thing you have to include is a website. I would recommend starting with .gov websites and .edu. So let's try to find an example. I haven't done this yet, but let's see. Look up plastic pollution. And then maybe we can even look up .edu. So I'm finding now an article from Columbia University about plastic pollution, and it has .edu. So it's going to be more reliable, but that is a blog. So maybe not. Oh, here we go. Here's a great one. The Smithsonian Museum .edu. They're going to have definitely super high quality information here. So this right here, look at this. It has the origin of plastic. Where does plastic come from? Where does it go? How much of it do we have? How to reduce it, remove it, reuse it, recycle it, and then future additional resources if I wanted to do some more research. So this would be a huge help when I'm initially starting my research on this topic. And I may even find some great stats or some great quotes to include in my paper. So .edu, .gov, .org is possible. It may be okay, but you really have to vet it. You're going to want to vet a .org URL for bias, for funding, for just understanding what their stake in the issue is, because it's possible that these .orgs are one of the stakeholders that we talked about here on this section, right? And so then obviously they're going to have a particular bias. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you just need to be aware of it. So because of that, I recommend sticking with these two, and I know Professor Durakin does as well. .gov and .edu are probably the more reliable websites to use. Okay, moving on to writing tips. So again, like I said, I've helped a lot of students with this paper in the past, and I've compiled a couple tips based off of the challenges that I most often see students facing. And this is what I've come up with. So the first tip I have for you is to choose a specific topic. We already talked about that, but I just really want to reiterate, a specific topic is going to lead to a better paper. The more specific the topic, the better the paper. I'm happy to help you narrow down your topic if you need help with that, but just really want to emphasize that. Secondly, be clear and be concise. Political writing relies so heavily on clarity and concision. So imagine that you're writing a paper, you're writing a policy paper for a Congress member that you work for, right? And they want you to describe the issue and then describe a potential solution to it. You're going to want to hand them a short summary of the issue and of your solution. You're not going to want to hand this super busy Congress member who's your boss a 15-page report on the issue, because they don't have time to read it, right? They're maybe going in between meetings, in between going to vote on the floor of the House, in and out of the office. They're going to have maybe 10 minutes tops to read it. And so the skills of writing in politics is to be clear and to be concise and to be effective with your words. And that's part of the beauty of this paper being only 3 pages, is that you're really putting these skills into practice. So be clear, be concise. If you struggle with being either of these things, which I totally understand. I struggle with it as well. I have added a link here to a Grammarly article talking about concise writing. So it's what is concise writing and why is it important? So in this article, there's a bunch of examples for how to make your writing more concise. So we have a tip here to eliminate redundant words. Redundancy is the enemy of concise and clear writing. Redundancy basically means that you're repeating things that don't need to be that you've already said. You're being super repetitive, or you're stating the obvious, things like that you don't want to do. Okay. So in my opinion, here's an example. A wordy way of saying this is, in my opinion, I think that's a problem. And here we have a concise way of saying that. In my opinion, that's a problem, right? Because if you say, in my opinion, we already know that that's what you think. So you don't have to say both of those, This is redundant. Saying, in my opinion, and then saying, I think, you're expressing the same thought, or expressing the same, you're just saying the same thing twice. And so you can delete one of those. So you could say, in my opinion, that's a problem, or you could just say, I think that's a problem. And that's a way to cut down on the number of words that you're using and make your paper more clear and more concise. So this is an excellent article to read. So definitely check that out if you struggle with being concise and clear in your writing. Another aspect of being clear and concise is to not ramble or over-explain. Remember that this paper is only 3 pages long. So if you choose a topic that you're super passionate and excited about, it can be easy to want to talk about it for a long time. Or it can be easy to do a lot of research into the topic, get super interested in it, and then write 2 pages describing what the problem is and why it's so important because you're so passionate about it. But then you're not giving yourself enough space to answer the rest of the prompt. So don't ramble, don't repeat yourself, and don't over-explain. Do explain. When I say don't over-explain, I mean don't sort of make a point, but you don't need to provide 10 examples to prove that point. You could use 1 or 2 examples instead to prove the point. So please explain in detail your problem and your solution, but just don't be repetitive when you do that. A good way to think about this is anytime you write a sentence or a word or an example or make a point, ask yourself, what is the purpose of this? And is it serving my paper? I ask myself this all the time. I really think very carefully, is this the right word to use here? Is this serving the overall point of my paper? If I'm saying this is a really big problem, does the word really need to be in that sentence? Does it? Or can I just say this is a big problem? So I'm adding all of these adjectives, I'm adding all these extra fluff words. Think about, do I need this? Does it need to be here? And that's going to, I think, help. The more you ask yourself that question, the more you're just going to be aware of how clear and concise your writing is. My next tip is to revise. I had a professor last semester who said the best papers that you're going to write are not going to be the very first drafts of your paper. They're going to be the 6th and the 7th drafts of your paper. So every time you revise and edit and tinker with your paper, the better it gets, especially when you're writing about policy. So make sure you're giving yourself enough time before you, as you're writing, to go back and proofread and revise your paper. Don't start writing on Saturday at 6 p.m. Give yourself enough time to walk away from the paper and to come back and revise it. And obviously, I'm here to proofread as well. But I think it's going to be super valuable for you to proofread yourself first before you bring it to a tutor. I'm always here to help, but please definitely practice revision on your own because it's a super valuable skill. This one's pretty obvious, but make sure you answer every part of the prompt. Like we talked about earlier, this prompt is fairly long and there's a lot of different aspects to it. So really make sure that you're addressing every part of it. And I can help with that as well. If you want to come to office hours on Saturday or you want to schedule a one-on-one appointment, I'm happy to talk about that. Finally, cite all of your sources, even if you don't quote them or paraphrase them. So I recommend using Zotero or another citation tracker, and I'm going to show you how Zotero works in a sec. But as you're doing this research and you're understanding the problem in a deeper way, you may not necessarily quote all of the articles that you're reading, or you may not quote every book that you read or every website that you look at. But those sources are all helping build your understanding of the topic. So it's important to cite them because you wouldn't have had that information and that understanding without those articles or books or sources. So make sure you're citing all of your sources, even the ones you don't quote or paraphrase. And to do that, I recommend using some kind of citation tracker. This is one that's super helpful, Zotero. Basically, as you go through, I'm going to show you an example. We're going to go to LA Times. This is actually an LA Times or New York Times article that I was looking at this weekend for a paper I was writing. And I read this article and I was like, got some great information from that. I'm going to save it on Zotero. So I've added Zotero as a Google extension, and I just click on it and it saves it. And then I go to log into my Zotero account, and all of my articles are there, so I can view them later. So highly recommend using that. If you're struggling to set it up, or you just don't want to use Zotero, then maybe just I shouldn't have closed that. No, my apologies. I copy and paste the link, right? You just copy it and then maybe put it in a Google Doc or in a Microsoft Word doc that you make sure that you're saving. But yeah, just keep track of your sources as you go, so you're not stuck at the end of your paper realizing that you don't remember where you got some sort of information from. And say you found a statistic and it's super helpful and valuable, but you can't find where it came from. And now you're stuck and you can't use that data because you can't cite it and you don't want to plagiarize. So just make sure that you're keeping track of your sources. It's just going to save you a lot of time in the long run, and make sure that your paper is the most reliable that it can be. Okay, that is all from me. Do we have any questions? Actually, I will stop recording, Elizabeth, so that you can ask questions.